The thing is, down in Wyoming, it's like, turn around.
Oh, you can mute them, you can do all sorts of things, turn off their camera.
Yes.
Stay over there.
Well, I mean, I can do
But
that.
I
Class,
It'll give me 5 minutes
so I went to school with grad school. and
Susan, this
So
dog.
first I have those books and there's so much. So I can sign yours, you get yours signed.
Sorry.
I look forward to it. I thought it was gonna be standalone Springfield, Wisconsin.
Well, that was what the original idea was.
Yes, Jim, check to see what you're gonna get to take.
No, I'm gonna tell people.
Probably a pretty interesting experience for a scavenger hunt, you know, in the sky. They don't get that far about.
Oh, good, and I think mine are the reading is the one you were in. This will be fun as what you're discussing.
No, Jim's. Okay, otherwise I could start passing the board around.
Well, I will. Nancy and I were like, which fun is this? God knows we know what it is. So it was fun.
But
Well, not the very end, but
like some people like
and then.
She is a muzzle.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
I need to get this back to you though. Okay. Okay, all right, thank you so much, appreciate it.
I can't find the thing for the banner.
Well, it's 1 minute to 7, so if you can find a seat, we can get started.
No.
Okay, so it's 7 p.m. Good evening and welcome to the first in the Aldo Leopold Audubon Society 2022-2023 presentation series. And my name is Jim Canales. I'm on the Audubon board, and just a couple of business pieces before I introduce our guest. If you stick around at the end, Sue has brought some treats. It's over on that side of the room, so please help yourself. She said she didn't want to have any to take home, so you have to be good. For people who are on Zoom, and thank you for joining us there, if you have any questions, which we'll have at the end of the show, of the presentation, just use the chat, and then we'll catch those at the end. And Susan, there was one other thing for Zoom folks.
Stay muted.
Stay muted. Yes, stay muted so that you don't interrupt the presentation. And then the other piece of business is that we will be having our bird seed sale, and I'll put these at the back of the room. So if you haven't gotten one in the mail, please do. It's one of our big fundraisers, and we appreciate it, and the birds appreciate it as well. So Dr. Pete Zani is an associate professor of biology, and he's the curator of amphibians and reptiles at the University of Wisconsin here at Stevens Point Museum of Natural History. He grew up in Eastern Ohio, and he grew up catching frogs, toads, other amphibians, and he became fascinated with reptiles of all kinds. He ended up studying zoology as an undergrad at the University of Miami, Ohio University, and he earned his master's degree in zoology, studying comparative functional morphology of lizard locomotion at the University of Oklahoma. He then earned his PhD at the University of Oregon, studying comparative functional morphology of lizard claws. And as a current professor at UWSP, his research tends to focus on the implications of climate limitations and how a changing climate might alter those limitations for individuals, for populations, and species, focusing his research mostly on side-blotched lizards in the high desert country of Eastern Oregon. And he told me before we got started that he had been in a number of different places teaching. He's been here now for 10 years, and he just lives down the road on Wisconsin Avenue. So Pete Zani, welcome.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate the introduction. I appreciate the invitation to be able to speak here today. It's a great pleasure and honor to be able to do so. So today I'm going to focus on the results of a project that started as a collaboration almost 10 years. It started shortly after I arrived here between the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point and several other state agencies. But before I really get into the, there we go. The meat of the talk, I want to make sure that I thank the people who really made this happen. Because as Jim mentioned, I do my field work in Eastern Oregon in the summers, and with the data collection that we needed to be do here in Wisconsin, I couldn't always be here. So I relied heavily on 4 years worth of students that were funded in part by the Department of Transportation and Department of Natural Resources for the, what we call turtle wranglers, to be able to help and develop this project as we go forward. And as I mentioned, there are a number of state agencies, Wisconsin Department of Transportation, individuals, including Janice Smith, Wisconsin DNR individuals who helped do this, several of which aren't in the state anymore, but have a great direct contact, like Mark Hirschfield, pictured here. People at the university, Jordan County Park, those kind of individuals. It was great community effort to sort of make this happen. So even people in the community helped monitor the site and continue to, like Paul Doxey, if you don't know him, he helps continue to monitor the site. So without that collaboration, I don't know that this project would have been as successful as it was and would have developed what we needed to know as part of it. I'm not sure if I can get the top bar to disappear. I don't know, let's sort of deal with it, I guess. So the issue is, and where we're going with this is, the idea that when we have a mitigation strategy, there are oftentimes multiple components that we have to keep in mind. And for a project like this, the components were that we had a fence to keep animals off the roadway so we don't have the mortality because of them crossing where they shouldn't, but then also a passageway where they could potentially go under the highway and move through this. And the problem were some limitations in the design that really made it uncertain whether or not we were going to be successful in making this happen. Why this came about was because through individual observations that you can make, I'll give you a website later on to show you how you can make observations that lead to a map like this. With the Wisconsin DNR, they track where people have seen turtles or where turtles have been killed on the road. So based on road mortality, this is simply the approximate turtle crossings per year, color coded. So we have 1 to 5. So yellow are low numbers of crossings per year. 6 to 25 is the orange, 26 to 50 or over 50 in this darkest orange. In Portage County, we really only have one spot that's the issue, and it's this one spot, and that's where Highway 66 crosses Jordan Pond. So that one spot then became an issue because when we look at that spot in detail, it's clearly the spot. Yes, there are places in town like Patch Street's probably the worst place in town still for this, or west of town where they had some issues with putting in fences and not having it be a massive place where there's turtle crossing. In this place, we knew this was an issue because we could go out there and we could count the carcasses of animals that had been hit on the road year after year. And the real issue is you're standing on a dam for the Wisconsin, or for the Plover River, which is behind the Jordan Pound impoundment to your left. Highway 66 then runs off towards Rosholt in this direction. County YY is behind you. That's Purlowski Road that you can see the road sign for that then heads south back towards, say, Fleet Farm and the east edge of Stevens Point. And that roadway becomes a major component of the mortality itself because the dam really can't be moved or the road rerouted because of this. It's hard necessarily to do some construction on a dam. You can't really easily dig holes in dams, putting tunnels under roadways when there's a high water table here. So that dam became the issue of, we wanted to keep turtles off the road because we know that along this stretch here, this is where most of the mortality was occurring. So we had multiple years to do this. We knew a project was coming down the pipe where the Department of Transportation regularly resurfaces stretches of highway. And as part of their environmental survey, they have to determine, are there endangered or threatened species in the area? And there were several that came up on the list that could be in the potential area that were observed nearby. And so they have to go through mitigation with the DNR. And the DNR said, this is one of the worst places for turtle crossings and turtle mortality in the state. So we really need to do something to try to mitigate that, try to get around this. So what they did was, through contacting me, try to develop a plan of study so that we could see how effective a proposed tunnel for this, the proposed wildlife corridor for this would work in the planning before phase, during, and then after phase. So we're trying to mitigate this all throughout the process, the construction process of this. So if we zoom in, this is the more modern today. We can see the elements of the grading on the highway, where there's a tunnel entrance here and a tunnel entrance there. And the problem is this tunnel has to cross 2 lanes of highway, plus the shoulder, plus the berm and the sidewalk on the near side, on the south side, and the guardrail on the top side. Okay. The observations that we were able to make prior to there being a fence and tunnel in place was that there were a lot of turtle deaths along this stretch of highway. So the undergraduates who helped with this project would walk along the side of the road and try to identify different zones or where the animals were killed on the highway. And we could use simply, was it on this side of the dam or on this side of the dam, this side of the raceway or that side of the raceway, this side of Burlowski or that side of Burlowski, to determine this, make it easier. And we mapped these out. And what we found is this cluster of where the animals are being killed, especially between Borowski and not quite to County Road Y, really down to about where the dam is itself, the spillover for the dam is itself. So this was our stretch where we really cared about the mortality and trying to keep animals from getting off the roadway in that stretch of the highway, getting out into the danger zones. So here's the proposal. We said, okay, well, let's put a fence along here where we have exclusionary fence to keep animals from getting into that stretch of the highway. We couldn't stretch down below the junction really with the county maintenance. So that's different maintenance, and that wasn't what the state was going to do there. So we have exclusionary fences here, and then we have designed in what we call turnarounds, little loops to get the turtle to go back in the direction we want it to, so it doesn't just keep walking without ever turning around. We didn't really care here because it would get to water in either way. But here we don't want it to go all the way around here and go around our fence. So these little turnarounds catch it and they just sort of walk around and just head back in the opposite direction. So this is the plan of doing this. Ultimately, what we did was we constructed this fence. Here's Mark Hirschfield from the DNR showing off its construction, where we have this 1-inch chain link fence with these pipes pounded into the ground and then a cap on top to keep animals from climbing over, because it turns out the turtles can climb this fence. And you can see the construction of one of the turnarounds where we have simply a loop of fence that pulls the animals back in the direction we want, just right along the highway. They're a little bit grown over at this point simply because by design, we were trying to let them go into the sustainability mode and see how it works without much input. Once the design was in place, we were able to then put in cameras. We were able to get a little bit of money from the state and DNR to put in cameras and then monitor remotely the activity of these animals. We just put these on time lapse. There is a infrared feature on many of these wildlife cameras. The problem is with turtles, they're so cool relative to their environment that the temperature difference isn't enough to trigger the infrared sensor. So we had to use time lapse. And we usually use time lapse of about 15 minutes or even smaller, like maybe only 10 minutes in some cases. So every 10 minutes, take a picture, and then we can look at those pictures to see events of animals moving through. So at the mouth of the tunnel, we had cameras so that we could actually see the movement of these animals through there. In this case, what I want to point out is, and in some cases, even though we're focused on the tunnel and the entrance to the tunnel itself, we can see animals through the fence. So here's a turtle that is on the wrong side of the fence, trying to get back to where it belongs. So over the course of this study, what we found is that the turtles, if your fence doesn't have integrity, they'll just go around it, get in the highway, get into bad places, or in this case, go around the fence and then try to come down the wrong way on this tunnel apron here and end up in a bad position. It could turn itself over and get away. But what we learned was that the fence itself, the integrity becomes really important. And that's very consistent with other studies that have been done on things like this. One of the aspects of this that was interesting was once we had the fence in place, we had a problem of how do those animals then get out of the highway or else they're trapped there. So we went back and we cut little holes up high on this side, create a ramp of aluminum flashing to allow the animal to slide down to this sand pile so that it can then have a one-way trap. So they can come this way from the other side, but they can't go up that ramp and get out of the fenced enclosure. So it works pretty well, just have a one-way exclosure. By looking at these same pictures, so the first one and then the second one, what you notice is when the animal slid down, it moved all the sand with it. That's how we can detect some of this, is sometimes there's footprints in the sand of that animal, having evidence of that animal moving down that, because we won't see it anywhere else in the pictures, and clearly something slid down that and then moved off camera. We tried to do the same thing and get evidence that some of the toads, because it turns out that wetland along that road and the forest on the south side of the highway is a big toad habitat, American toad habitat. So we had these built in, trying to get evidence of them using it. I'm not sure that this amplexing pair of toads actually used it or walked away or hopped away in this case, because you can kind of see the track. I think they actually left along this track here when they moved. But with these sequence pictures of every few minutes, we could then see some of these events and didn't have to have either infrared or video evidence of this. So let's talk about the different years worth of data that we collected. We had a pre-year, 2016, and what we found that, I'm sorry, there's 2015 above it that we can't actually see because of that bar. I wish I could get rid of it. I don't want that. Oh well. 2015, the road mortality was on the nature of, I believe 70 animals. So 70 animals killed along the highway in 2015. This was before the construction. We knew what the baseline was based on that. People had been telling us for years that this was a bad place for mortality. During the construction then, once the fence was in place, what we saw was a dramatic drop in road mortality. So road mortality was on pace to be similar in 2016 until by about July when the fencing went in place, we see in essence a drop of road mortality at that place. So the red indicates where the fence currently exists. Only 4 of those 26 were documented after the fence went in place. So the fence alone seems to have really reduced mortality in 2016. So that by 2017, we only had 10, about 1/6 or so of the turtles that were killed in 2015 in our pre-year. And you can notice too where they are. In some cases, they're turtles that went beyond the range of the fencing. It's hard to know if we should even include those in this, right? Because notice there's 3 of these over here where the turtles are out there. So one of the issues is, did we just create a displacement where now the animals can't cross where they want to, so they just go around the fence? It doesn't look like that's happening, but where the mortality does seem to be occurring is in places where the fence doesn't really exclude them. Or in places where they can get between the fence and whatever tie-in there is with the concrete edge of this. And that's one of the continuing issues is some of those edges are creating little gaps that smaller turtles can use to get around this. And that's probably what accounts for these animals here. They probably got through the fence somehow. You can see also on this map where the placement of the tunnel is. And one of the things we discovered as part of this study is what the turtles do behaviorally is they get washed over the raceway, come back out trying to get into the pond itself, and in doing so often end up in this little corner. Natural corners in this case are a great collecting place because the animals behaviorally, they can see where they want to go, and if they go that way, they're going away from it, and if they're going that way, they're not really getting any closer, so they kind of end up here. And what I would do in retrospect is probably place the tunnel as close to that corner I could, simply to help funnel the animals more closely into the tunnel itself. But the fence clearly is doing its job. 2018, 26 road mortality spread across there. 2019, 7 road mortality. So why is 2018 so weird? It's because 2018 was the year that they drew down the dam to do some routine maintenance. And in doing so, what seems to happen in those events is when you draw down the raceway and there might be turtles living in the raceway, or when you're drawing it down and washing additional turtles over, they then come out and try to get back into their habitat. And so what we see is there's a spike in mortality associated with when that drawdown event happened in the fall. So that spike isn't really anything other than an event in their environment that sort of forced all those animals to do that. So 10 of those 26 were during the drawdown of Jordan Pond for that routine maintenance. So knowing that, what that means is we can potentially plan any drawdowns. I know that there was one recently, any drawdowns to kind of go out there and help know that there's going to be an increase of animals trying to cross in that environment. So what it looks like is with the post-construction 10, 26, 7, or you take out the 10 during the drawdown, 10, 16, and 7, we're talking about a fraction of the mortality that we saw pre-fencing in place. 66, 70 animals down to 10. I would call that in absolute terms a win just for helping reduce mortality, which is one of the major goals for this. helping to reduce the risk to drivers who are going 55 in that stretch of highway, encountering a large snapping turtle, that could be dangerous, or people swerving in oncoming traffic, that can be dangerous, or people potentially getting out of their cars to help an animal cross, that can be dangerous. So this, I think, is a win just for the animals, but also for motorist safety as well in that place. When we look at the fraction of animals that were remaining in terms of how animals are being killed because of the fencing now, it's a reduction of about 75, maybe 85% of the mortality that we saw pre-fencing is now occurring. And instead what we see is a lot of the mortality is occurring at the edges of the fence or beyond where the fence occurs, and probably not even as part of the animal that would normally be counted in our surveys anyway. So that's the first part, dealing with the fence. Fence as an exclusion device helps keep the animals off the highway. That alone is in many ways satisfying what the highway department wanted. But now from a DNR perspective, an ecological perspective, we want to maintain connectivity for these habitats. The animals of Plover River should be able to move freely along that river corridor, that riparian corridor, and in doing so allow for genetic connectivity so that the tunnel becomes an important next component for helping populations persist in the long term, not just because of the mortality, but because of connectedness and gene flow. We had limitations in the tunnel itself, in the area of the tunnel that we could actually create. So the tunnel we knew was going to be smaller than was optimized for turtle passage, just because of several things. One is we have to bury it a certain depth under the highway, or else the freeze-thaw cycle just causes it to heave and it'll come out of the roadbed. And when you have a pipe coming out of the roadbed, that's not a good thing. So the minimum, we have to bury it beneath. Problem is you're in a dam, you can't bury it so deep that you're below the water table. So we were, in essence, about maybe 10 inches or 12 inches above the long-term average for the water table. And in some cases, water may actually flow through the tunnel if it gets especially high. So we could only go so deep and we could only be so shallow. That's our constraint in that dimension right there. And we can't really make it much bigger than that, or else whatever structure's in there will probably collapse because of it. So we had these reinforced concrete sections that they created. It was only 1/10 or 20th of a foot tall, right? So 1 of the few inches tall. Almost 2 feet wide, not quite, and about 39 feet in this small section. This is just under the roadway. The other parts we can make slightly larger because we're not under the roadway anymore. We don't have the same problems. So that diameter tunnel for that length, so we can use based on the literature that we find on the science that's been done on this, that those dimensions give us an area with that length, that for a length of a tunnel that we're going to create, that opening should be much bigger. That much bigger. That should be the size of the opening relative to what we were given. So we knew that what we had was going to be way short of optimal. So then what we had to brainstorm were, what were the ways that we could actually behaviorally try to entice animals into the tunnel and use our understanding of animal biology to benefit these animals in as sustainable a way as we can. We knew we couldn't go that direction with our tunnel. We knew we couldn't make it that much bigger. So with that limitation, we said, well, okay, what if we put lighting inside? Well, who's going to maintain it? What if it breaks? Who's going to pay for the upgrades? Right? These are all conversations we had to have with the engineers from DNR or DOT, as well as the biologists from DNR. So we came up with grading. Well, let's open up the outside of this small under the roadway space. Let's open it up and now put grading on the shoulders of the road, so that we can actually let light in. And that maybe the issue is they can't see with enough light in there. So not lighting in it, but lighting from above, natural lighting. There's a whole design associated with plows that they can't be above the roadbed or else the plow will catch it and just rip it right out of the ground. So it had to be flush with the roadbed. And again, it had to be in essence, no maintenance for the foreseeable future. They put gravel in it, light gravel, so that we have some substrate. They painted the inside white. You can see the inside being painted white. That's me actually going in and doing a touch up on the painting inside that grading, because there were some issues with how much substrate they put in and what color that was inside there after a while. But this is the view from the south entrance looking across to the north side. And what you can notice is the inner 39-foot section is really dark. You can see just how uninviting that is. This is okay. We have enough light coming through, some natural light in the middle of the day reaches down this on both sides. So we knew that that would be at least better than just having a 60-some foot tunnel that was unoptimized. But we had better things that we could come up with. We explored different ways, put a big pile of light colored sand so that rather than have, as you see in the last picture, a dark green backdrop for the turtles to look at, because that's all vegetation on the far side, have a light color. So now we get a light color. Okay, that works, but now we block the tunnel. So what I've done in the meantime is replace this with aluminum flashing reflectors to reflect light into and basically act as a light backdrop to the tunnel itself. And that was seemingly all it really took, because once we put this in, turtles were using this quite readily, or at least going up to the apron, turning around maybe, and then leaving. And so we would consider an animal that came up to this point in the field of view of the cameras. We had cameras looking down the tunnel in this case, but also at the sides. This would be an attempt. If it actually made it all the way through, that would be a passage. So we scored from those cameras, those remote cameras that we were collecting, passages and attempts for each animal. So here's what it is out there currently, a little bit grown over, but as long as we have this section relatively free of vegetation, and it's really the north side that matters, because the vast majority of passages were from the south side to the north side. What seems to be happening is they're getting swept over the dam, coming out of the raceway, trying to get back into Jordan Pond. So they're just accidentally getting swept over the raceway or the dam, and they just have to get home, and that's where they get out into the road, because that's sort of the shortest passage for them. We tried guides of aluminum flashing. They don't really need the guides, but they're nice to sort of force the animal into at least this position. So they have to go around it in this position. And now they're like, oh, I can see all the way through there. That's the way I want to go. So maybe I'll go that way. So these are actually useful as well, especially on the south side again, to help guide the animals to where they want to be. Most of this is now grown over on the north side. It's all grown over with poison ivy, which is a nice thing to keep most people away from it, because it's just chock-a-block full there. But the backdrop with the aluminum flashing went from this dark green, you can't really see much light, to, oh, that's clearly light on the far side. That seems to be the key for the turtles, is them being able to see light on the far side is the lure that now is pulling them to where they want to be. And that really changed, it looks like, the behavior of these animals. So here's one of the setups. We have camera, backup camera on poles that were pounded in the ground, aluminum flashing to create that guide. We have slides here so that any animal that comes around can then slide down this, but not in essence go the other way, because what we were finding was some animals were trying to climb the fence and then climb this. It doesn't look nice because I use spray foam, not the right thing to use. But they would climb, and then we found they could climb across that, so we had to put something there to keep them from. Turtles are willful little beasts. Let me just say that. We have lots of pictures. Times don't always work out, but the point is that we have passages and we have attempts that we can score from the pictures. And we can see the animals, and in some cases we can almost interpret their behavior. Like this animal over the course of the 9:14 to 9:15, this is 1 minute intervals. The animal clearly wants to go there, but just is afraid to do so. And in some cases, well then, if you notice on the right, the substrate moves, that animal went around and then disappeared. So that would be an attempt, but not a passage, because it didn't have any evidence that it went through the far side. In this case, the animal starts here at the bottom. You can't see it in this picture. If we dropped all the lights, you might be able to see there's actually just under the grating on the near side, the shadow of an animal. Where you can see it is, notice the far side, the light. See that little black thing that shows up just above the red line? That's the turtle exiting the far side. Don't believe me, there it is. So 5:05 p.m. on this side, 5:06 p.m. on this side. This is the north side. This is that animal emerging from the far side tunnel. So confirmation that we can actually detect passages of these animals using these cameras, and it works really well. So all we have to do is score the, I think at one point I estimated it was something like 1 million pictures we scored over the course of the whole project, because we had like 8 cameras out at one time doing like just a few 5-minute intervals. But we get some great evidence of animals using this, right? So a big adult female snapping turtle coming through the tunnel. At time of year, it doesn't really seem like it's specific to just the spring or the fall. It's all times of the year that they're doing this. Doesn't matter that we can't see the top here. I'll tell you what it says. This is time in terms of the month of the year. We started the fencing in late in the year, and I'll show you 3 different years. And this is really just the first year when construction was in place, and then I'll show you subsequently the next 2 years. And the whole point is to note that we can look at passages, which are the closed circles, and attempts, which are the open circles. I'll show you 2017. So what we see then is I took out all the zeros. So any dot on here is a non-zero number. That's true up above as well. And that's so that we don't have all the zeros where all the days in between just have lots of pictures with nothing going on. So 1 animal passed or attempted. In some cases, we have up to 10 attempts, 11 attempts in 1 day. By the size, and in some cases, the pattern on the head or the color, we can sometimes tell the individuals apart on the turtle. So a similar size painted turtle with different color or pattern can be distinguishable to the individual. So I'm pretty sure these are individuals that we're looking at in terms of the attempts. And then just a few passes each day. So notice there's not really any spike in when the attempts are. It's not like, oh, spring, this is when they happen, or fall, that's when it was. All times of year, this seems to be required. And it's not any one time of year when the passages seem to be happening either. It seems to be happening all times of year. But it's a consistently successful movement of these animals once the fence and tunnel were in place from the mostly south side to the north side. I think that all the passages you're seeing, except for one, was a south to north movement. We had 168 attempts. 38 of those were successful, about 23%. So about a quarter of those. 2018, the second post-construction year when it was really settled in, similar numbers up to about 10 in any given year. I plotted these on the same axes on purpose. The same number of passes, roughly speaking. And then we get the weird spike in September. This is the weird spike in September associated with the drawdown of Jordan Pond. So we can actually see it in the data when that happened. 287 attempts throughout the whole year. 66 attempts were actually successful, so 66 of those were passages. Very similar, if not the same, success rate. Why we have that many more attempts and successes is really this particular 2-week period when the dam was lowered. So the dam dynamic really comes into play because now I think we didn't appreciate that what was happening was the animals were being swept over and just trying to return home. We thought that there was something more going on or movement in both directions. At least for the turtles, that doesn't seem to be the case. So a number of attempts. Of the total 487 total passages that we scored, about 109, this is the best estimate we have, were successful, about 22%. So good between year averages. There doesn't seem to be a spike later on. So if animals were learning to use this over time, we might see these numbers go up in terms of percent of successful. It doesn't seem like they're necessarily learning over time. They're just either successful or not, or they figure it out or not. And then because we can tell the individuals, a third of the individuals attempting to transit seem to be successful. So attempts versus individuals here are different estimates. So because one individual might make more than one attempt, go out, come back, go out again, 2 different attempts by the same individual. So if we take those repeated things out, we actually have a higher success rate of individuals themselves. The neat thing was with those cameras just going all the time, we saw other things as non-target audience for this. So a dozen non-turtle species at least have successfully used that particular tunnel over the course of this experiment. And this includes things that you might be familiar with in your neighborhood. Raccoon, beaver was fun. This is right along the river, so that kind of made sense. Striped skunk, they get hit on the road out there sometimes, so that wasn't too much of a surprise. So many muskrat. So many muskrat. And the muskrat would just go through the tunnel at full speed. You would almost never see the muskrat. You would see the little track of the sand move where its feet would move. And then you might occasionally get to the path. So many muskrat moving through the tunnel. Weasels, both mink and least weasel out there. Not common, but certainly out there along that riparian corridor. Probably my favorite. Porcupine that was out there trundling along. We are really close to the northern geographic distribution of Virginia possums. Really close. I think it's maybe Wausau, if not Tomahawk, where they don't get much further north than that. This is one of the few observations that we ever made. I think we only made 1 or 2. I've talked to a few people who have seen them in their yards in town, but Virginia possums are not very common around here. So we saw at least one of those moving through the corridor. Family of wood ducks. That was always fun to see a family of wood ducks come through. And I didn't put it on here, but a number of snakes would move. They wouldn't necessarily move through the tunnel, but at least move along the corridor. So it seemed like it's a useful tool to have with a fence and a tunnel to help minimize this. And the best part is it seems to be working. There is a Friends of the Plover River Turtles page on Facebook, that's what that says, that is run by Paul Doxey these days, who will occasionally post pictures. During the project, we were posting more. We haven't really used it much recently, but it still does exist there. I mentioned previously this website that the DNR maintains, and it's a great website for being able to make observations of turtles in the state. Because what the state wants to know is, where are the areas that need mitigation? Where are the road crossing mortality events? Or where are the animals trying to cross the road and therefore at risk? Where are the nesting areas, right? They're asking for these observations so that they can make decisions on, especially the turtles of concern, things like Blanding's turtles, map turtles, some of the wood turtles, that kind of thing. So this is at the Wisconsin DNR. If you just search for Wisconsin turtles or Wisconsin turtle report, that usually comes up pretty quickly. And you can do this online. I did this recently for a map turtle sighting I made down on County Road HH in the Wisconsin River, as well as a few Blanding's turtles I've seen around. That information is, in essence, what is the ear to the ground for the DNR to be able to get the information to make the decisions about where they need to mitigate in the future. So that this project was like a living laboratory for the DNR and the DOT to see what construction techniques do they need, what works, what do we have to keep in mind when we're designing things like this in the future. Because they don't want to spend money that isn't going to be useful for solving a problem. So I think with the data that we provided them and the report, the final report that we had, we could show very conclusively that while not perfect, the tunnel and the fence in combination have drastically reduced mortality. We haven't eliminated it. We didn't think we could, but with the limitations that we were given, we at least made a dent in that being the worst place in this county and not the state. That is all I have, and thank you for your attention. Yes.
What is the passage success compared to other similar studies?
Based on the size of the tunnel, it's consistent with what other studies would predict for that size tunnel. So that big circle is where you get basically no constraint on the turtles. All the turtles will simply go through with that big thing. And that small, now they're expecting somewhere between 40 and 60% will go through, which is fairly close to that 39% number that I showed you. So it's in line with what we knew with that size opening, allowing the passage to occur.
So has DOT done more projects similar to this based on what you did?
Not Wisconsin. I've been contacted by Minnesota for several projects over in Minneapolis area, and where else? Someone else contacted me for information about design features, that kind of thing. But I don't think the state of Wisconsin has had any other areas that have come up for mitigation along that roadway because there's been a problem. No other red flags have popped up like the way this one.
So for the 66% that don't make it, do they go part of the way? Do they go halfway and turn around?
We see all configurations of what they do. To them opening and then turn around and leave and never come back, opening several times and then disappear, all the way into that grading chamber as far as that, and they'll sit there. Sometimes they'll burrow into some leaf litter and wait for a while there. So they've gone that far. I've never seen them go beyond that and stop. Once they go into the inner tunnel, they seem to keep going at that point.
Okay, my end question is going to be, are we doing the right thing or not? And my thing is that my Audubon Bluebird Trail is from Highway 10 to down Burlowski Road to Jordan Park. And so several times when we've gone there through the years, we have seen turtles trying to cross because we go early in the morning. And so we've gotten out of our car, pulled over and take them across the road to the other side because that's where they were heading. Now my question was, should we be doing that?
I think that's fine. Yeah, I think If an animal is clearly making an attempt to cross there, then yes, you want to help it the rest of the way. So I think that's fine to do. I've had several occasions where I've had the same thing happen, like where an animal's on the shoulder in early spring and it's sitting there. And I'm like, are you just basking there in the sun, or you're actually trying to get across the road? They agonize over what is the animal trying to do. I eventually just said, well, he's probably trying to get across, or else why would it be sitting right here? So I helped you and that animal do it. Or like, oh, I had it on the Green Circle Trail a couple weeks ago, sitting on the shoulder of the trail. I'm like, are you really trying to go across the trail? I'm not really sure. So it can be, you don't really know, but I think it's okay to move them.
These were right in the road.
Yeah, in that case, if they're in the road, absolutely, move them in the direction they're heading. Other questions? Well, oh, go ahead.
All right, so if the turtles are heading home, what is the turtles' home like?
Depends on the time of year. So this time of year, most of the turtles are trying to stay as warm as possible. So they're in, basking areas where they can still get out of the water as it cools down and be in the sun. But then soon what happens is they'll go into the bottom of the pond, like Jordan Pond or other areas where it's calm, and they'll either sit on the bottom or burrow into the bottom and overwinter there in the bottom all winter long. And then when they come back out, what they really like is, if you've ever been out to that stretch of highway, there's the pond itself, and then there's this little mitigated wetland that they created with the dike to make a shallow wetland area. That's what the turtles like. Their home is this, because in the spring, it's warmer than the river. So this warm, shallow backwater that warms up quick in the spring as soon as the ice melts, that's where they all are, is in that. And then they sort of slowly move out from there. So they're in the whole river area. It's just, that's where they're concentrated. It's just right in that little warm backwater marsh. So marshy areas, depends on the species. They can be in wetlands or in the river itself. It really depends on what turtle you're talking about.
Yeah, so it looks like you're not certain how many of the turtles that have been washed down have come back up, because they make all their attempts and then maybe it's 100% success, but well, not 100, but maybe you're getting almost all of them to come back eventually, right? Or have you done something to sort of watch to see, do some of the turtles get washed down and just decide, I'm gonna live on this side of the river from now on, or?
I've observed, if you stand on the shoulder of Highway 66, right where the raceway drops over the dam there, piece of wood floating just there that had gotten washed over, a turtle basking on that. Right? You're like, in the raceway, why are you staying there? And I'm not sure if they're just confused or dazed or haven't figured it out yet. When the raceway drew down, I'm not sure that the turtles were really being washed over the raceway as much as they may have been in the raceway itself. So I can't actually answer the question of where these animals are coming from, because we didn't have good enough data. We didn't have radar telemetry, for example, to see which animals were moving, what the problems were. It's just with our markings, it looked like we were getting animals that we were marking on the north side, showing up, trying to get back, and they had never crossed the other way. So clearly they're being washed over. I don't know what percentage of those are just animals that are being washed over and immediately return and try to get out, or are living in that flowing body of water, or even if they try and then give up, we don't even know where they go at that point. Are they just giving up and then going off into the forest or the lower part of the lower river below the dam? We don't even know the answers to those questions. But it's sort of this interesting thing about, well, at least we're getting the success to maintain the connectivity. And that was really the ultimate goal. So there is a way for them to move and not everything's going to be fatal across that highway.
Yeah, and we can assume that your success rate's really much higher than it appears when you put the numbers.
There's
on
the
it.
potential for that, yeah.
Yeah, for all those. Yeah.
Right.
How many species are there at that location?
There's at least 5 species that occur there. It depends on whether or not things like the northern map turtle have gotten that far. They were only just recently reported in Wausau and in Stevens Point. So we're not sure that those are there. It's just they're probable to be there, whether or not they're actually there. But things like painted turtles, snapping turtles, soft shells, those are the things that we're seeing commonly in that place. And then everything else seems to be just a rare or occasional occurrence. The painted turtles, as you would expect, are really common. So are the snappers. Soft shells, probably less so, but certainly there.
I'm really interested that you said that this is one of the most fatal places in Wisconsin. That's kind of stuck to me. And so has this what you've learned from this project. Is DNR DOT gonna be implementing some of the work that you learned in this particular project for other installs as they're doing road work construction?
So they specifically asked for in the plan that we produced, the final report, a section on recommendations for the future, like lessons learned in essence. So that's where we talked about, if you have a natural pinch point, put your tunnel at that, so that's where all the animals will collect. Make sure that your backdrop is light so that you have something that allows for that to draw the animals in. Try to keep your diameter above, these ratios. That really is a length area ratio there. So we were able to make a lot of recommendations in that to be able to help them so that in the future, we shouldn't have to require the pre, during, and post study because they've already figured out from the experiences we had here, how to make this better from the get-go.
And then how much maintenance goes into this at this point?
At this point, none by design. So
Okay.
after the money ran out from the DOT and DNR, we said, okay, we want to basically let it go and then see how it weathers.
Okay.
And what we're trying to gauge is how much maintenance do you need to be able to keep fence integrity intact? Because that is the key thing. And that is where the community can play a role. Just by, if you're out there and you notice something, being able to, help plug a hole or move animals across, absolutely. I mean, it's something that certainly can be monitored just to help keep that integrity intact. That seems to be the key thing for keeping animals off the roadway.
Did you publish the results?
Not yet. I'm working on it. The pandemic got in my way.
And if you see a hole and you don't have material for mending it, can you report it to somebody?
Yes, that's where the Facebook page would be a good way to communicate, just to be able to report it there. Because otherwise it's hard to know. You can report it to Jordan County Park.
Oh.
Because that's technically Jordan County Park land
Okay.
that we're working on there. So you can report it to them and then they can help find the right person to get in touch with.
Sure.
Are there questions in the chat?
There is. I'm just bringing it up here. We have Ned Grossenickel asked, do you have any turtle data after 2019, or is that when the funding of the project ended?
We were able to stretch 3 years of funding into 5 years of funding by using those cameras effectively. So once that money ran out after the 3 to 5 year extension, then we didn't actually get any additional money after that. Plus the pandemic, obviously in 2020, made it really hard to do anything at that point.
Okay.
So there's no more cameras out there, right?
No more cameras out there.
That's it. Here. Yep, that was all the questions on there. Anyone else in the room?
If you had more money, what kinds of questions would you be asking? What?
In terms of monitoring the animals by radio telemetry, we could look at their movements and see how the animals were moving around and try to gauge what's going on to pull those animals over the dam. Maybe try to coordinate some monitoring associated with when the dam is drawn down so that we can be out there at the right times, or at least coordinate some program associated with that. I don't know, I didn't think about that more.
The animals, like what kind of migrated up and down?
I have been asked by DNR not to comment on
Sensitive question.
that. They are a state endangered species.
Yeah.
And they're highly prized in the pet trade, and they are poached like crazy.
What was the question? I couldn't hear that.
Are wood turtles an issue?
Oh, okay.
The answer is no comment.
Well, Dr. Zani, we all want to thank you so much for being here tonight and joining us. All of those online, thank you so much for joining as well. We do have treats that Ms. Sue Hall brought, so please stay for some treats, some snacks. You can ask some questions there. It is our birdseed sale time. It is it's it's our only fundraiser of the year. So if you have not gotten your bird feed sale order form, we do have copies here. You can take that with you. I think the orders are due early October, so you'll want to get those in to John Munson, who is collecting those order forms in order to get that truckload sale for pickup October 14th and 15th. So, and we are looking for volunteers. So if you happen to be available on the 14th or 15th, we are looking for some help on those days as well. Thank you all so much. Our speaker for next month is going to be John Bates. Did I get that right?
Yes.
He is an author. He's amazing. He's a naturalist from up north, and he's written a book recently, and he's going to reveal all the secrets of the wildest lakes that exist in Wisconsin. So I got to see just preliminary some of his talk when he was writing the book and sharing a little bit about our wild lakes here in Wisconsin and those secret spots you can go paddle or fish or just sit and enjoy that we still have those gems. So thank you all so much.
Here we are.
Yes.
We just call sometime.
Anytime, yeah.
Right.